Good morning, Viola, as well, and good morning to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Always good to see your smiling eyes. It won't be long, y'all, and I'll be able to see your smiling faces again. Today's title is Transform or Transmit Your Pain. Pain must be transformed, or we will transmit the pain to others. Resmaa Menakem, the author of My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Hearts and Bodies. When he was a boy, Resmaa would watch television with his grandmother. He would sit in the middle of the sofa, and she would sit on the sofa and take up 2 seats. She would rest her legs in his lap. She rested her legs, and if her hands were feeling any pain, she would ask him, "Please rub my hands." And he looked at her, and she seemed as if her hands would relax, and she would look at him and smile. One day, aware of the pain in her hands, he looked at the pads of her hands and noticed they were much thicker than his. Why? Resmaa is a clinical social worker, a body-centered therapist, and a consultant to the Minneapolis Police Department. His focus is on issues related to how we process trauma. Our spiritual principle says that God can transform our pain into power. God can transform our pain into power. Spiritual power, the power of the soul. Authentic power is building something inside of you that you just cannot lose, and no one can take it away from you. Resmaa practices somatic therapy, which teaches that emotions are produced in the body as sensation and interpreted by the brain as stories about how we feel. Resmaa discusses the impact of racialized trauma that is experienced by Black, white, and blue people. Blue people being law enforcement. The writer suggests that our collective trauma is experienced not only in our thoughts, but in our bodies. It's a mind-body thing. Therefore, we make unconscious decisions, and sometimes we just choose unwisely. Have you ever done anything and you thought you wouldn't get caught? I mean, really? Did you think you weren't going to get caught? Did you think you could just get away with it? So, where you were filled with guilt and shame and fear, did you really get away with it? And in situations where you might get caught, but you realized that you would not be punished, did you do it? Do we only follow the rules because we think we might get caught? And if we get caught and we can get out of it, would we do it? If we don't get caught, does that make it all right? Not many people who do damaging things to others really want to be noticed. But in the universe of infinite possibility, we can make choices. We can make good choices, and we can make negative choices. Resmaa recommends and suggests that racialized trauma and trauma in general is actually passed genetically. Not only are you dealing with me when you deal with me, who grew up in Detroit with my adopted parents, you are dealing with my German Jewish mother and my Black ancestors. And that is quite a combination. But Resmaa also says that white supremacy is actually passed genetically. At significant levels of pain from racism, we can experience PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And people with PTSD experience intense feelings of pain, of helplessness, and of horror. Resmaa's grandmother answered his question about the pain and the thickness of her hands. At 3 years of age, she started picking cotton, which has thorns much like roses. The tenderness of her young hand, her 3-year-old hand, would bleed from the thorns. Think of the last time you had a child in your hand and you felt that very soft hand. It seems to move us, it softens us when we have that experience. But his grandmother's hands became tough when the bleeding for her hands continued as she continued to pick cotton. And her hands became too hard to bleed from the thorns. Racism has an accumulated trauma caused by historical, social, and personal events. Such deep trauma always affects the body. Think of how tragic slavery and sharecropping are if this is passed genetically. Racial trauma changes our nervous system and it changes our brain chemistry. It creates a pain body. Racism lives in our bodies as trauma, and the trauma accumulates over time between individuals and across generations. Much like a virus, it spreads and it even mutates. So Resmaa says that healing cannot be limited to social and political change between individuals. Our bodies need healing from the trauma. Psychological trauma can lead to the inability to cope or integrate the feelings that are involved in the experience. Trauma can occur from a single event, which makes all of us responsible for every interaction, every call for love. Unhealed trauma can lead to long-term negative consequences. Our responses to trauma as Black, white, and blue people is often unconscious. The part of the brain that controls higher functions, such as analysis and choice, is often bypassed. Resmaa argues that the trauma of racism is not processed in our higher functions. It resides in the lower functions of our brain, which operates by instinct and by bodily reactions. The instinctive reaction is all about safety and the preservation of life. We choose the survival mechanism by our perception of safety and survival. Our instinctive reaction is either rest, flight, flee, or fight. He writes that evidence of trauma is transmitted genetically, but that does not justify racism. He argues our ancestry is involved in the trauma of Black, white, and blue people. Race, which is a human invention, is related to power. See, the most vital part of Resmaa's teaching is this, is that racism is not just an individual issue. It involves our ancestry, our culture, and systems. It's a system, and that is the problem. He argues that an innate system that resides within all of us responds to the unhealed trauma that leads some blue people, some white people, and some Black people to make unwise decisions and to respond to the situation based on their perception of the threat of survival. See, I think we just have to acknowledge that fear is really the problem. But pain can be transformative. Pain, in some cases, is the only thing strong enough that it destabilizes us in such a way that we can deal with our addictions and with sadness, to non-clinical depression. It reveals our arrogance for believing that we can successfully manage life without the inner presence of God. It reveals that we can see ourselves as separate from God, our ultimate reality. And when we do, we transmit the pain onto others. It can make us lack compassion, to blame others, and in some cases, our codependency makes us lose ourselves trying to care for others without personal regard. And in this case, you're not really doing it for them. You're doing it for yourself. We deny our responsibility in our transformation of our pain into power. Ernest Holmes says, why all the suffering and the sorrow and the pain? Why has tragedy accompanied the journey of humankind? There is no other way through which true individuality can evolve. Humanity must be left alone to discover ourselves. If we don't have choice, then we lack individuality. Do not hear that I said that we must suffer. That is not what I'm saying. But if we do suffer, there can be transformation. There are 4 fundamental fears, right? Poverty, pain, being misunderstood, and the uncertainty from the fear thought of all of the human race. To overcome these negations, we must find something that is more significant than the fear. Somehow or another, we must learn to overcome them by clear thinking, because there is a healing presence within you that we must recognize this presence within us. The healing presence must flow out into action through our consciousness. It is this healing presence that performs the change in us from pain to power. Therefore, if we desire the healing presence to manifest itself, we must first believe that it is true and that God can do for you only what God can do through you. How do I transform the pain into power? Overcoming power. The inner awareness of being united with the loving presence of God transforms the pain into power. How do we transform the pain into power? Resmaa guides us by saying we must build community between black, white, and blue people. Resmaa says that sitting with the pain, acknowledging it, and being aware of the sensations in our body is part of the healing process for black, white, and blue people. For black people, trauma processing exercises emphasizes that we must acknowledge the pain. And I would also suggest and practice compassion. And for white people to process racial trauma, take ownership for the self-learning, for addressing the white body supremacy and white fragility. Even though you may not have practiced racism, make an effort to resist racist systems. If the trauma of racism, yes, amen. If the trauma of racism is inherited in our genes, we must break the future cycle. For blue people, for white people, and for black people, We must collectively break the cycle of it being communicated into the future. For healing, for spiritual healing that transforms our pain into power, we must take responsibility for our thinking and to correct what is going on in society that is not life-affirming. See, we forget that we forgive for our benefit. We must practice mindfulness. Being in the present moment is all that we have. If we are thinking in the past or in the future, we are only avoiding our need to address the issue. The past and the future have no power over us. It is only a diversion. We can only truly live in the moment. We energize the pain body by telling the story over and over in our thoughts. Now, don't lose the teachings in the story, but the story can fuel the pain body. We must first acknowledge the pain, but deny its power and affirm thoughts of only abundant life for all. Don't judge your feelings, experience them. Judging gives power to the pain body. Judging is a diversion. Releasing the story and its emotions are transforming the pain into power. Each of our stories are sacred. It is the place where we become aware of the loving, healing presence of God within everyone. Keep the lessons from the sacred story, but let go of the story. See, we must elevate our awareness. To be stuck in the story is believing that we can live in the past and change it. The things that trigger us inform us what's our pain body. We must let go of the emotions. Why? Because emotions are addictive. Feel the emotion without the thought. There is a way through the wounds of life. We can make our wounds and our sacred stories change our lives. Sacred is the place where we become aware of the healing presence of God in our lives. It's our place of awareness. Resmaa teaches, your thoughts are responding to your emotions from your body sensations. But remember, there is no fear in love, because perfect love casts out the fear. Don't engage in an argument because you just want to win. It really won't help. We change our chemistry when we change our thinking. We learn to trust the inner voice and the loving presence of God. Remind yourself of your oneness with divine perfection. Love that lets us know that we are enough. The goodness of the divine presence, that this ultimate reality, this infinite wisdom, that the universe is on our side and not against us. It works for us, not against us. We are responsible for doing the right thing even when we have been offended. What you do returns. Reap what you sow. Send out, it's coming back. It's the same spiritual principle working when we retaliate. Most importantly, in love, deal with your stuff. Stop the excuses and receive the healing presence that resides within each one of us. When our pain is transformed, we recognize that there is hope. See, pain is transformed into spiritual power. Authentic power is building something inside of you which you cannot lose, and no one can take it from you. We are welcoming in this spirit of loving presence. Set an intention for your life to be more life-affirming, happy, joyful, and full of peace. To be transformed into the best you possible. When you become aware of the loving presence of God within us, our pain is transformed into power. Be the change in life that you want and you desire. We are transformed from within. It is an inside job. The pain body will wither away. We are made out of a pattern of perfection. When we believe that we are disconnected from this divine pattern, we long to return to it, and sometimes we take the long road home. The idea of separation from God causes us the pain, but the pain disappears when we turn to our wholeness and our awareness of the divine loving presence. The loving divine presence is within every black, white, and blue person. The transformation of pain into power does not discriminate. Everyone has the ability to transform their pain into power. It turns the shame of the outcast into praise. When our pain is transformed, it transforms what appears to be worthless into something priceless. It makes beauty from ashes. It turns our sadness into dancing. It makes love from hate. It provides the oil of joy for worry and suffering. Peace replaces the feelings of worry, and pain is transformed into power. Power is building something inside of you that you cannot lose, and nothing can take it away. And so it is.